Good morning and welcome to today's Moss Adams webcast. Boost construction project success with Invoice reviews. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Moss Adams webcasts are designed to help elevate your business performance. Transform your future for the better with advisory solutions tailored to your vision and supported by our collective technical resources. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge our recent news that Moss Adams is joining forces with Baker Tilly to create a new firm, one designed to serve the needs of the middle market. It's really exciting, and you can read more about it on our website via the link posted in the slide deck and handouts widget to the right of the slide view. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters for Moss Adams Construction Projects Advisory Team, Charnee Foston, Senior Manager, and Jordan Wahl, Manager. And Charnee, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. So very happy to present with Jordan today. It is great for those of you who could join us. So I'm Charnee Foston. I'm a senior manager in our construction and real estate advisory practice. I specialize in construction advisory, and as a practice, we probably do about 75 to 100 construction audits annually, which includes kind of interim and closeout audits, payment application and change order reviews, as well as looking at streamlining processes and improving project controls. So happy that you guys could join us today, and I will let Jordan introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Wahl. Been with Moss Adams for about 9 years now, and my entire focus is on construction projects and capital program performance audits. So I spend a lot of time going through agencies and districts and corporations programs for their capital setups. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you all today about payment applications.
So our objectives for today, just understanding strategies that can help improve the payment application process, and also understanding how contract requirements can play into that process. Talking about the common challenges that are experienced throughout the payment application review and approval process, and then learning about just the beneficial aspects of doing third-party reviews and how that can help mitigate some of the risks that are common. We've got a poll set up just so that we can kind of understand the landscape a little bit of our audience. So what is the status of construction for your organization? Are you in planning? Is it ongoing? You've just completed a project, or you're not really sure, but you're here kind of just for the information. And we'll give everybody a few minutes or seconds to respond. Just a few more seconds. We're about 70% of the way there in responses. Okay. So it looks like the vast majority are ongoing with their construction. So that's great. And hopefully there are some kind of tips and tricks in here today. For those of you who aren't really sure or are in the planning phases, I think this will certainly be a beneficial discussion for you as well today. And Jordan, if you'll take us through kind of what payment applications are for those who, their primary focus is not construction or payment application review from the AP or AR side. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Based off of that poll, it sounds like hopefully many of you are familiar with what a payment application is. But for those that are not, it is your formal method of payment that gets submitted to you as the owner. So this comes from contractors, subcontractors, vendors, etc. This is your essentially invoice that comes from them. It should have key details within it that allows you to review and determine if what you're going to be paying out is covered, is compliant with the contract, mathematically works out, etc. It should have your total contract value, should have your change order values if you have change orders, revised contract value, any work you've completed to date, what amount they're requesting from you, and previous payments made, and any retention that gets withheld should be detailed. We'll get into that a little bit later here. So key reasons why this is important for you. At its most basic sense, this is the payment process for you all. This is how the contractor communicates to you as an owner what is owed for the work that they've been performing. This impacts your cash flow for you as a contractor. It impacts your cash flow. So from both sides, it affects your cash flow. This also allows you to process things in a timely fashion. So if something takes too long on the owner side and payment doesn't get over to the contractor, it can affect the progress of your project and the timing. From the contractor side, obviously you want to keep things moving. It can affect your cash flow side if you're not getting paid in a timely manner. Subs obviously want to get paid as well, and they're kind of further down the line from a contractor. And then overall, it just shows your financial progress on the project. So you're tracking against what you budgeted, what you estimated for. You can see that progress through what payments have been submitted. Then some important considerations when it comes to payment applications. Contract type has a big effect on what you can expect from a payment application standpoint, from an invoice. 4 main types we see: lump sum, time and materials, cost plus, and guaranteed maximum price. I'd like to say the most common we see is either lump sum or guaranteed maximum price. From a documentation standpoint, let's talk about lump sum real quick. Lump sum, it's a single amount that you've agreed to between the owner and the contractor to pay for completing a project. Usually this payment from them is a % complete. So as they're making progress through the project, you have either an architect, an inspector, whoever you've designated within the contract that will review and determine whether that % complete that's being stated by the contractor is correct. And then you just make payments on that amount. Support typically for backup in this is limited just because it is a lump sum agreed to amount. Time and materials, cost plus, and guaranteed maximum price have a lot more documentation that can go behind them, and we'll talk about more of that in just a bit here. But these are instances where you've agreed to a price, change orders can change it. Usually it is like an actual cost type situation. So you're looking for invoices, backup, something to support the cost that has been submitted to you. So when you're looking at your contract and setting it up, this is something key to look at is one, which contract type are you going to use? And then two, what kind of documentation you're looking for from within your contract, what you want to require the contractor to provide, what do you want to receive to make you comfortable with what payments you're going to make.
And while Jordan's advancing to the next slide, we realize that a lot of you in the audience may be contractors, and this may apply to you on a contractor subcontractor level. So while we may be using the term owner or contractor, it can also flow the other direction between contractor and sub. So just keep that in mind as we're kind of going through today's presentation.
Perfect. So as we mentioned, contract terms are key to the whole process. So within your contract, you need to ensure that the language you use is specific to what your organization's needs and wants are for what you can actually accomplish. So from an owner side, you need to make sure when you're going through and looking at it that, you know, I want report X, Y, and Z. Well, make sure you include that in there. Or, you know what, we don't care about some documentation. Okay, well, let's remove it. Make your language in your contract intentional for what you're looking at. From the contractor side, make sure you have an understanding of what the owner is looking for. That way, when it comes time for you to file, you know, on your monthly basis, submit your monthly payment application, you're meeting all the requirements of the contract. That way there isn't kind of some kind of payment withheld or it slows down the process, et cetera. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit here, but some minimum provisions that should be included within your contract terms. Pencil copy timing and review process. So clearly outlining what that review process is going to look like, what the timing of it's going to be is essential to make sure that one, payment applications are submitted on a timely manner every month, and two, that the review process is flowing correctly. If the process takes too long, then it slows down the construction, it can slow down your cash flow, it kind of ripples through the whole project. So making sure within the contract that your timing and review process is outlined is essential. Payment application forms. So this is what the basic form, what you want it to look like. Typically what we'll see within the contract is kind of an exhibit or a section where they put in a template payment application form of exactly how it wants to appear. Sometimes this is just the standard form that is used across the board from AIA. Sometimes it's a custom form. For owners, contractors can help kind of provide that form if you don't have one already picked. Either way it goes, both parties should sit down and come to an understanding of what that form is before the first submission. That way when it arrives, everyone has an understanding of what it looks like, what each line is doing, how it flows. And that's key for review personnel on both sides, because not always, you know, the PM will review it, but sometimes it goes off to an accounting team to perform a review. We'll make sure that they're involved with that process. That way, when they get it, they know what it looks like. Sometimes some key parties aren't involved in that discussion, and it kind of gets lost in translation from flowing through the process. Supporting documentation. So this is probably the biggest part of the payment application. So outlining one in your contract, what documentation is required? What do you want to see on a monthly basis from the contractor? Contractor having an understanding of from the owner of what they are wanting to see what kind of system reports you can produce. Obviously, every side's trying to kind of leverage and save time. So just kind of come to a general understanding between everyone, the level of documentation required. Typically, this will include subcontractor payment applications, so people supporting within the project, invoices, receipts, timesheets. This is, you know, material orders. If time is performed for something on the project, like cleaning, make sure you got timesheets for the people that are doing cleaning. If we're unloading a truck, make sure the timesheets are there. Labor reports, if people are buying gas, if there's equipment, make sure there's equipment reports. So just general support for all the items being billed for in that monthly payment application. Stored material support. This is something that's always been around, but I want to say has probably received a large uptick since COVID due to kind of price uncertainty within the market. So this is where, and not all projects have it, but we saw it a lot with steel or like switchgear, electronics, where things had long lead times or prices were kind of fluctuating. Pre-buying your materials, so there, you'd run into a project where they'll buy steel for a year's worth of of the project. Well, they're not going to use it all on the first day, so it comes in on a truck and it gets placed somewhere on the lot, or it gets stored somewhere else. Wherever it's being stored, making sure that there's documentation of that stored material. So, what material came in, what material is going out, dates, quantities, weights used, amounts used, and typically we also recommend some kind of photo support that goes with it. So making sure within your contract, you outline what that process is for documenting stored materials. And then finally, your conditional and unconditional lien releases specify on, the timeline for when you should receive conditional and unconditional lien releases, and ensuring that, depending on which one you want, how it should flow to you, should it be submitted monthly, just outlining that process. And then finally, your procedures and timing and conditions for when payments should be withheld. So this is kind of jumping back to that first bullet point, making sure the entire process is outlined and what it will look like. And if something is wrong with the payment application that's been submitted, be it missing documentation or it's mathematically incorrect, what does that process look like if it has to be kicked back to the contractor, or something's missing or something's wrong and something has to be withheld? Just making sure it's very clear for all parties what the results of that is.
So we're going to take you through some examples, and Jordan's going to kind of kick us off, taking a look at just some high-level contract language of kind of like a good, better, best scenario. But we did receive a question on the pencil copy timing and review process. So a pencil copy of a payment application is going to be a draft version. So let's say the April 2025 payment application is going to be submitted for payment. So roughly on probably the 20th to the 25th, a general contractor will typically submit a pencil copy of a payment application to an owner for their review. So that will include all of the subcontractor invoices and subcontractor payment applications as backup, and then the contractor's kind of schedule of values and what they're submitting for payment for the month of April. That will go through a review process just to try to catch some of these exceptions that might pop up, or if there's missing documentation, or maybe the percent complete, if it's like a lump sum project, isn't appropriate for what's been billed. So it's kind of that back and forth process to review the payment application before it's submitted in its final format for payment. So Jordan, if you want to take us through the examples.
So example number one, I'll cover kind of the left side first. So in this case, the contract type was misunderstood, and then actual cost, the contractor had some issues supporting the actual cost, and it couldn't be validated by the owner. So in this case, we have the payment and retention section of the contract on the screen. What you don't see is elsewhere in the contract, it was established as a GMP, as listed there with that first green highlight. Elsewhere within the contract, it had specific language for actual cost support. So that's your invoices, receipts, et cetera, that we discussed just a second ago. But in this section here, they had some conflicting language where on the monthly basis, so approve the progress payment within 15 days, great, but it was based off of a periodic estimate. So in that next green section, progress payments shall be made on the basis of monthly estimates. So in this case, this was a school district. They were receiving the payment application on a monthly basis. At the very bottom section there, they have some required documentation. So a bunch of, schedule of values, some trackers, so for project savings, but they were only receiving those little reports and the schedule of values, but no supporting documentation for actual costs. In the case here, okay, their monthly submissions compliant with what's required here, but the rest of the contract required actual cost. So what ended up happening is, as at the point that we came in here, they were already 3 to 4 years into their project and had, 3 to 4 years left to go. It became a difficult situation for all parties because one, how the contractor was struggling to get some of the documentation that was required by the contract because their submissions were an estimate. The district wanted some support. So there was just some conflict between contract type and what was actually required by the district and what was needed. End result was they kind of had to find a happy medium ground and settle for some audits towards the end of the projects that are still upcoming. So just ensuring that you get that contract type, what's expected, and making sure actual costs can be validated, laid out in your contract is essential. Oh, Charnee, you might be muted.
It happens at least once a day. So for our second example, this contract clause, it states that substantiating documentation is required, but it's not saying what the substantiating documentation is. So when we find that language is not prescriptive enough, it creates that ambiguity where contractors or subcontractors or vendors can kind of submit documentation that they want to provide, and they may not necessarily be giving full backup documentation to substantiate the cost or substantiate the percentage completion of a specific work scope. So being more specific is always better, and understanding the terms of the contract and what a project owner, or if you're a subcontractor, what a general contractor means by, other substantiating documentation. And then our third is kind of our best example. So also a GMP project. And then this article here very clearly defines what needs to be submitted with each payment application. So payrolls, petty cash accounts, receipted invoices, check vouchers, or other proof of payment. So really being prescriptive is helpful for the owner side, but also helpful for contractors and vendors to clearly kind of set that expectation, which makes the payment application review process easier, I think, for all parties, and then especially if you're having that third party review done as well. So common challenges, there's a bunch of them. We have kind of listed here the 5 most common and major that we see. So payment applications that are just inconsistent in format. That could be from month to month, the format changes. That could be subcontractors and vendors are using a different format than a general contractor. All of that, it takes time to review. It takes time if you're looking at an invoice from one period to the next period, and you can't kind of trace the dollars and cents back and forth. So we do see that pretty frequently. Complex or incomplete documentation, so kind of 2 ends of the spectrum there, but documentation that's overly difficult to follow. If I need, a spreadsheet with 25 tabs across the bottom to follow the backup of a payment application, that's likely too complex, and definitely time consuming for pulling and gathering that information, and then also for reviewing that. And then on the other side, documentation that's just incomplete. You may be providing an invoice, but maybe you're not giving the labor tickets, or you may be providing a labor report that just shows names and hours, but no dollars associated. That's an example of kind of incomplete documentation, which we actually see quite often supporting a payment application. Both of those kind of first 2 bullet points can contribute to the third, which is just disputes over amounts. That's probably one of the most common reasons that we're brought on to a project or to take a look at a payment application or do, kind of an interim or closeout audit, is because people can't agree on, this is what we submitted, this is the work that was performed, this was the actual cost of that work, or this was the actual contract amount. So we see that fairly often. delays in the approval process just because the review of a payment application can't really be streamlined with incomplete documentation, complex documentation, missing documentation, formats that don't necessarily make sense. And then overall, just kind of a lack of cost transparency. So that's something that we do see. I don't want to say often, but it's definitely something that we do see. And we'll have a case study a little bit later on in the presentation where we had a contractor who was keeping their cost reporting. We had a project owner who also was keeping their own kind of set of books and records. And they get, halfway through the project and they're working off reporting that is millions of dollars off from one another. So definitely the payment application process plays into that cost transparency, and it's kind of that source document, if you will, to kind of bridge that gap and start having that conversation.
Okay, so standardized formats. So based off the common issues noted by Charnee, there are a few tools and solutions that we could use that can kind of solve for some of those problems, not all of them, but get you down the road a healthy way. One of those is standardized formats. So if you can standardize what your payment application looks like, what your contracts look like across an organization, it makes it a little bit more intuitive for everyone when it comes time for review. A few of those formats is your American Institute of Architects, your AIA forms. I want to say for stuff that I look at, this is probably the most common I see. This is your G702 and G703. These are pretty well prescribed. They're pretty, kind of outlined. You can kind of add some specifications for your scope of work. Great format to use. The other one is consensus docs. This is another one we see frequently. They're pretty comprehensive. They have a clear structure. Your online platforms. So a lot of people with, advent of technology, a long time ago at this point, but you got your Textura, your GCPay, your Procore, they all have built-in templates and built-in workflows. These can streamline things for organizations on both sides because everyone can have access to the main hub for where this is all occurring. What you need to look out for with this, though, is making sure those built-in templates and workflows align with the contract. So from the owner's perspective, if you want that flow to go a certain way, make sure that it does meet your needs. Just defaulting to the online platform may result in it not aligning with your contract and cause problems for you down the road. And then number 4 is custom formats. Some people may disagree with me, but typically this is where I think a lot of issues for people happen is they kind of go off, they had a bad experience with something previously and they decide they're going to go with their own and make their own little custom format, which we've seen work great, but if it hasn't gone through enough review or hasn't had it looked at by someone who kind of has familiarity with it, that format may be lacking in information or may not have a good flow to it, and it could slow down your process reviews as you are reviewing your payment applications. And then we've talked about it quite a bit, but your documentation. So this is both sides, contractors primarily, since they're the ones assembling the payment applications, but just maintaining a good source documentation. So one, making sure that you have on your end all the contracts and subcontracts, change orders, various reports. So that's your cost report, so your job cost report, your change order report, allowance logs, any progress reports, schedules, lien releases. So there's all this documentation that's required. It should be prescribed in the contract. But just making sure from the contractor side that one, you keep it organized and well maintained. That way, when it comes time to assemble the payment application, it's easy to pull it in and you're not duplicating things from different payment applications. And then from the owner side, when you get it, making sure that you keep a record of it and it's organized on your side. We'll talk a little bit more about the benefits of monthly and quarterly reviews. So making sure that's done on a monthly basis. But when it comes to the end of the project, if you've lost documentation midway through and there's an audit, that can cause problems because one, you can't pull that documentation. So just making sure that you've maintained a good, orderly folder structure for the documentation that's required in the contract. And then Charnee will talk about communication.
Yeah, so this seems like a known thing to everybody. Communication is part of everybody's hopefully daily life, in work and personal situations as well. And so I think sometimes when you talk about communication as a tool or a solution for, a payment application, it seems like that's a silly thing to kind of talk about. But within construction, there is tons of coordination between stakeholders and the owner, between the owner and the contractor, between the contractor and the subs, and so on and so forth. So really critical is holding those kind of OAC meetings, so owner, architect, contractor meetings, to facilitate that communication process. Typically, we see that done on a bi-weekly basis at a minimum, I would say, depending on the size of your project. And sometimes subcontractors are invited into those meetings as well if there's a critical issue that's kind of plaguing the project. Consider having monthly progress reports. And we see a lot of project owners who have this project tracking, but we sometimes we recommend it at a project level for a contractor as well, so that the two sides are really kind of talking to one another, and it's not just one party reporting the information that they believe to be true without kind of fact checking it with the other side. So monthly progress reports will include tracking of the budget versus actual. It'll help forecast for project completion, kind of what's our actual spend going to be at the end of the job. What percentage of our budget is actually change order work versus the base scope. And it can include anything that you kind of deem to be pertinent. So obviously a schedule, baseline versus actual, I think is important. Progress photos, safety, quality. It can cover various different areas. But having that as kind of a backstop and a checking point, so that you can confirm your progress reporting against your payment application, I think it is critical as well. And like we've said, really just establish those clear timelines for the payment application process. The contracts that we gave those kind of snippets of above, they lay out the general process, but not necessarily dates. So I think just making sure that that's communicated in writing, preferably, and that's upheld, I think is going to do wonders for the payment application process. And I think we have another, I went too fast. I think we have another poll. So have you ever had independent payment application reviews performed? So yes, you've used kind of a third-party consultant or other support. No, but you would consider it. No, and you're not really sure that you see the benefit, and you're not entirely sure of whether you have or have not. And we'll give a few seconds for response. Just about 10 more seconds. Okay. So we're kind of all over the map here, which is totally fair. So about 30% of you have, another 30% haven't, but you think that you would consider it. Some of you don't see the benefit, so hopefully we can talk about that in our next few slides. And then some of you aren't sure of what you've done historically, which is totally fair. So Jordan, do you want to talk about some benefits?
So an additional tool and solution, kind of continuing with that, is the third-party reviews. So these are independent and objective. So these are meant to supplement what the owner is reviewing as part of their process. We don't like to hold down the process of payment, and I know that's the concern of most contractors, is adding one additional person to the mix of review slows it down and slows down payment, which is not ideal. But that is not what our intention is. So we like to kind of be a little bit removed from that process. One, the third-party reviews also validate that documentation is there. Once again, this is third party, so it's not someone that's already connected to it. Just verifying completeness, accuracy, and compliance with the contract. They get performed at regular intervals. So typically we like to recommend monthly or quarterly. And this is where we assess the payment application and supporting documentation. And this can frequently be a little bit more productive than a sample-based audit, just because it is looking at everything that occurs on a monthly basis rather than just kind of one snapshot in time that we grab a sample from, which is still a good method, but this is a little more comprehensive in terms of that monthly support for you all.
Yeah, so like Jordan said, the cadence of doing these on a regular basis really can mitigate risks early and help identify risks earlier on in the process of a project. Really, the process of processing a payment application can really be streamlined just to make things quicker, easier, more efficient, and just has a set of independent eyes taking a look at it. But really that helps eliminate the need for your director of construction or your accounting personnel to really be doing that deep dive and dedicating that time to doing that review of your own payment application if you're a contractor, or if you're a contractor looking at multiple subcontractors. Obviously that's a time-consuming process. So that really helps to kind of streamline that process and really allows people to get back to the business of construction, as opposed to paperwork and reviewing backup and contract compliance and some of those items that can be a little bit daunting when that's not your full-time kind of priority and job. And then really just kind of the improved controls. So cost savings is obviously always the most noticeable benefit of it. But I think also just preventing costs from kind of being submitted that aren't going to be contractually allowable. It's a lot easier to prevent a cost than it is to come back and recover that cost once the check's already been cut and it's already been cashed. And that's a difficult conversation sometimes to have with a contractor or subcontractor. I think also just the benefit of contractually compliant charges, and kind of like Jordan was saying, not having to do a construction audit at a future point in time on a sampling basis. With the payment application reviews, you're really reviewing as the project progresses, and you're having the ability to do 100% review, as opposed to construction audit at a point in time where maybe you'll look at 50% of the cost or 60% of the cost. So it's really that kind of added level of assurance. And I know that we certainly do it. If you have a provider who's helping you with a third-party review, reconciled cost is one of the greatest benefits. It sounds like a simple process, but you'd be surprised how often it kind of gets a little bit wonky. So having a third-party reviewer come in and take a look at supporting documentation from a contractor or subcontractor's cost reporting system and comparing that to a payment application can sometimes yield, discrepancies. And so that's a great avenue as well. I think just overall, we've laid the benefits out. I didn't read each bullet point by point, but I do think that having a third party review really does, it allows for the proper setup of a project. And hopefully, you might have a few more issues in the beginning, but they do get smoothed out, they get ironed out, they get corrected. And then going forward, your project is a lot more successful. Payments can be more timely, as opposed to kind of fumbling through and then maybe doing an audit at the end of a project and then having to come back and try to recover costs and things like that. So hopefully that answers a little bit about the benefits. I'm going to quickly go through a case study because I know we've only got about 5 minutes left. So we did monthly payment application reviews for a manufacturing client. Their project was $130 million. Schedule initially was anticipated to be about 18 months, but they did end up behind schedule, over budget, and the owner and contractor had cost reports that were off by millions, so they didn't reconcile to each other. There were unanticipated budget increases and significant change orders, which I think accounted for some of the gap between owner and contractor records. And ultimately, the project owner really just didn't have an understanding of what cost was incurred on the project because the payment applications themselves were a bit disorganized. The format kind of changed midway through the project. So they actually brought us in to do monthly pay app and change order reviews as those were submitted. And we got brought in a little bit late. So the project was already, I want to say, 9 to 12 months in by the time. So we kind of retroactively went back and reviewed those initial payment applications. And then from there forward, did a monthly cadence. We also performed a cost reconciliation between contractor records, payment applications, and owner records. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the project is wrapped up, and we identified potential cost recoveries of about $3.5 million on the project, mostly due to some self-performed work that the contractor was performing. They couldn't provide the substantiating documentation and backup for those costs. They also didn't understand how to apply their markups for insurance, for bond, and a few other costs specific to the job. And they also were billing for just kind of non-reimbursable overhead related costs. So things that they were considering kind of safety incentives or other costs that were home office related expenditures that shouldn't have been billed to the job. So while it would appear that an owner may identify those things, it's not, other people's primary business. So we totally understand how those things can slip through the cracks. And that's why it can be beneficial to have somebody who is experienced with contract compliance kind of come in and take a look at the supporting documentation of a payment application. Ultimately, we helped open the lines of communication for all the parties that were involved, and everybody could really kind of have that assurance that they weren't having to spend their time going through the process of reviewing these payment applications because they had that external support. And then I know we've got just like a minute or so left. So key takeaways. Successful projects really need well-defined contracts. Cost of work needs to be defined. Payment application process needs to be specified. Change order process needs to be specified. Challenges with the process can really be mitigated with a clear process, regular communication, and having that detailed documentation. Third-party reviews by qualified professionals can really strengthen controls, identify cost recovery and prevention, and really prevent payment of those excessive costs. and communication and transparency is key. And we are up against the time limit. I think we have a couple of questions which we will get, and we'll certainly reach out to you guys directly with responses to those. And I think I can turn to Emily. Yeah.
Yep, we are right at the top of the hour. As Charnee said, if we didn't have time to get to questions today, but we will be following up with you after the webcast. So thank you, Charnee and Jordan, for a great presentation today. We do have a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey, as your feedback is very important to us. Please also visit mossadams.com for future webcasts and other resources to help elevate your performance upward. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.